Thank you, the program director, for the good work you've been doing since morning. The chairman of Ethiopian Airlines Group and the CEO, the Secretary General of African Airlines Association, the Secretary General of African Civil Aviation Commission, the Regional Director of ICAO Southern and Eastern and Southern Office, CEOs of airlines present, CEOs of partner organizations that are present, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Francis Okome, the Air Transport Policy and Regulatory Expert at Comesa, where I'm working for the support of the Air Transport Sector Development Program. I have about 15 minutes to make my presentation. And the good thing is that probably 40% of it was SATAM, and SATAM has been implemented according to the session we've just had. So that makes my life a little bit easier. So mine is just to support what the other organizations are doing. Of course, we know at the highest level we have the African Union as the mother organization that established AFCAC, and of course, given the unique continent we are, we also have some regional cogs that make the wheel roll, and these are the regional economic communities, and that is where the common market for Eastern and Southern Africa is Comesa. So the program is called Support to the Air Transport Sector Development Program. And this is a program that is being implemented by 5 regional economic communities. That is Comesa, East African Community, Intergovernmental Authority on Development, which is IGAD, Southern African Development Community, SADC, and the Indian Ocean Commission, IOC. So the program is funded by the European Union, and the grant is 8 million euros. And the program is for 4 years that started in 2021, although the actual implementation delayed a bit and started towards the end of 2021. So the main objective of this program is to contribute to the sustainable development of the air transport sector in the East Africa, Southern Africa, Indian Ocean. And of course, since morning, the issue has been sustainable development. So the program has 3 specific objectives. One of them is to operationalize the single African air transport market. And that is why I was saying 40% of the presentation has been done. And to achieve that, because we are talking of more connectivity, more flights, more aircraft, then we need to strengthen the regulatory and institutional capacity of the civil aviation institutions so that we can have proper oversight. And of course, there are issues that are coming up on safety, security, competition. All those are within the realm of oversight. And to also achieve this, we need to improve the air navigation efficiency in the region. So under SATAM, so we'll be joining AFCAC and other organizations in supporting the signing of the solemn commitment. These other 19 member states that have not joined SATAM, we need to visit with them and see how they can join. Other than that, as the AU ERICS reported here, that the competition regulations have been developed, but we need to fast track their domestication to provide a framework for operationalizing SATAM. And eventually, there are also many economic regulatory regimes that we may need to put in place to ensure that we have an environment where SATAM can work. So with that, we'll be holding awareness workshops for countries that have not yet committed to SATAM, and we are planning to visit 5 countries in June and July. We will be working with countries to see how we can review the national laws, rules, and regulations. And also for the member states that have signed SATAM, we need to support them to ensure that they implement the 8 concrete measures diligently. Under the joint competition rules, the main item here is advocacy for their domestication so that we have a good framework. Generally, air transport issues may be very vague. Sometimes you go to member states, they don't know whether it is the CAA to do it or the competition authority in that member state. But we want this to be clarified by having clear structures, clear regulations that either support the 2 organizations to work together. And strengthening the regulatory and institutional framework. One of the panelists here was saying that sometimes they move much faster than the civil aviation authorities, but it is because sometimes the civil aviation authorities can only develop capacity commensurate with what is on the ground. So in this, we'll be seeking to support the separation of the regulatory functions from the service functions. A number of civil aviation authorities within the region still have those 2 functions. Either they are the airport provider or the ANSP provider, and they're also the regulatory arm of that state. And that, from a performance-based environment, may not augur well. The other one would be to enhance the managerial and the technical skills. So one of the activities we did last year was to do a training needs analysis, and this will inform some of the trainings that we'll be rolling out to build that capacity. And the third one will be some activities to improve the gender and environmental mainstreaming in the aviation sector. So to support this, we've done a baseline study, we've done a training needs analysis, and what we'll be doing next will just be to develop legislation to support the separation of the CAS and the NSPs and or the airport providers. We'll also be developing model organizational structures that can be adopted for such organizations. This year, 2023, we are working on a consultancy to develop appropriate cost-based models to sustain revenues for regulatory authorities. Of course, you can see that during COVID, when flights were not there, so the CAs that were getting their revenues from passenger operations may not have been able to finance the operations. So the aim of this consultancy or these activities is to ensure that the civil aviation authorities can have sustainable revenues. And this is key in having a predictable oversight regime. We don't want a situation where you can operate in Africa, but you can't operate in another continent. You cannot get a Category 1 to fly to the US, or you go to Europe and you are told you are banned. That is what we are trying to avoid here. So in the managerial and technical skills, we'll be having targeted training for women in the aviation sector. Of course, if you can see this room where we are, you will realize we are so many men and very few ladies. And that goes up from the bottom to the top. So we'll be keen on doing that. And finally, we'll also be seeking to support members to promote environmentally sustainable operations. Under the gender sensitivity, we'll be doing workshops. Some 2 workshops will be done this year on the gender inequality, and we'll also be doing some workshops or roadshows on creating the career opportunities in the aviation sector. Of course, this will be targeting high schools, colleges, and that level where we need to get these people to know of the available career opportunities. In the result area number 3, which is improved air navigation services, of course, just like we have the roads on the ground, majority here may not be from flight operations. In the air, we have airways. Fortunately, the airways are not as rigid as the roads, but the rigidity comes on because of national security issues. And therefore, in this, we'll be working and doing workshops on civil-military coordination. The airspace would be available, but generally in most countries you find the military has demarcated quite large pieces of airspaces for their use. And the idea here is that if those airspaces could be shared when they do not need them because they are not always in use by the military, then that could enhance seamless upper airspaces. We're also looking at working together to share data so that there is smooth handling of flights. We don't want a situation where your flight departs this point in time, and when it gets to cross the border, and the air traffic controllers of the other member states say we were not aware your flight is coming. Because these are the issues that bring safety issues, and they also bring inefficiency. Because when we are talking of efficiency in fuel, then we need to have very flexible use of the airspace. We need to use what we call free routing airspace, and some of these are the initiatives that will go under result area number 3. So with this, we are supporting the member states in implementing the ICAO standards. And last year, we did a workshop to work with the Democratic Republic of Congo. Next year, we'll be targeting some 4 member states. We'll also be looking at supporting member states to implement and achieve their Abuja safety targets. And we'll be developing frameworks to promote flexible use of airspace. So I've talked of the civil-military cooperation that we'll be conducting workshops to create that awareness, because sometimes the military don't understand how the civil flights operate. Similarly, those who in civil aviation also don't understand the military, because you will find most of the time those who are in military have never worked in the civil side, and those who are in the civil side have never worked in the military. So there's usually an understanding gap. So those will be the activities that if we undertake, we hope to achieve the 3 result areas, and we should be able to achieve the overall objective of this program, which is the sustainable development of the air transport sector in the industry. So I've said what we've already done. So under SATAM, last year we developed a model BASA and did 1 stakeholder workshop. Of course, we'll continue with this workshop, and hopefully by the end of the year, we should have finalized it and it's accepted, so that the document being used to grant these rights is a standard document, and will harmonize such. So we talked of the baseline study, which we've done of the training needs analysis, and the trainings will be undertaken in the 2024. I've talked of the ICAO SAPs and PANs, which we did in supporting DRC in last year. We're currently working on the institutional framework for deployment of seamless, interoperable communication, navigation, and surveillance air traffic management systems, and we hope to have the workshop at the end of the month in Cairo. The challenges is one of accessing data, and African Union, Africa are leading some project on data. Sometimes getting data in our region may be a challenge. The other one is the complexity, because the region we are handling has 29 member states, and the member states belong to the different regs. The states have different programs and different priorities, but that is the framework we are supposed to work with and hope to achieve this. To conclude, and from so far what has gone on since morning, it is cooperation, coordination, collaboration, and that is the way forward that we are emphasizing. We can do it, the airlines are cooperating, you can see the 5 regs are cooperating, and therefore with this unified effort, we believe we will achieve the African Union Agenda 2063, but not in 2063, because we who are living now need to enjoy. In 2063, some of us may not enjoy those benefits. We need them now and today. Thank you so much. Program Director, I think I've achieved the targets. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause. Thank you very much. So at this point, can I invite Aaron Monetsi to please come and do me the honors of presenting a token of appreciation to our presenter for today. Whilst that is going on, ladies and gentlemen, I would want to invite our next panel. Thank you so much. Very well done for saving us 5 minutes. It's my pleasure to invite Mr. Glyn Hughes, who is the Director General of TIACA, the Global Cargo Organization, to come and lead us through our next panel, which is titled Enhancing Cargo Operations, E-commerce Networks, and Logistics. Glyn, welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Raphael. I'd like to invite join me on stage, please. So if I could invite Mr. Minyashal, Director of Cargo Marketing, Ethiopian Cargo and Logistics. Mr. Mike Mutahi, the Chief Operating Officer for Astral Aviation. Mr. Randy Heisey, the Managing Director, Commercial Marketing for Boeing. And Dr. Jakob Funkenstein, Marketing Consultant from Embraer Commercial Aviation. A round of applause, please, for 4 very great experts. Now, Aaron left his notes on stage, which says, run around, ask a lot of questions of the audience, jump on stage, jump off stage, etc. At my advanced years, I can't jump off the stage like he did. So forgive me, I'm going to take a seat. But before I do, there's just a few slides that I'd like to run through, just to give a little bit of context, and that's not those. So if we could jump to the cargo slides. Unless I'll give somebody else's presentation, but I'm no expert in that area. Have we got the technician? The technician's gone on a coffee break. Okay, or I can describe them. They're rectangular, 16:9 format, load of numbers, charts, colors, lines, letters, doing all that sort of stuff. Aha. Okay, so it's just a few slides to set some context. A little bit about TIACA, but I'm not going to skip through that. We're a trade association, but we're horizontal. We represent the entire supply chain from airlines, forwarders, shippers, blah, 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 blah. Everybody across the supply chain that deals with air cargo can be members of TIACA. Sorry, I want to skip through this and get to the really important things. I have to do the sales pitch. These are all the people we work with, blah, blah, blah. One of the things I wanted to get is the value of air cargo to the aviation industry. Before COVID, traditionally air cargo generated about 12% of airline revenues. And you may be able to see the numbers are a bit small looking at from the back, but during COVID, those numbers got up to close to 40%. Last year, they were close to 27, 28, and we think they'll slip back a bit this year as passenger revenues return. but long term, the value that air cargo brings to the aviation industry is going to be significantly more than it was pre-COVID. I mentioned this morning, for those of you that were in the room, that the value that air cargo generates in terms of economic prosperity for a country can be 8-10 times more than the value of inbound tourism. And these are numbers thanks to my former employer, IATA, which basically saying for 2021, 2022, we're looking at about $8 trillion worth of value of exports that moves by air versus about $600 to $800 million in terms of inbound tourism. Now, it's important that tourism and air cargo go hand in hand because, of course, we joint use the capacity. But it shows that air cargo is a considerable contributor to national economic prospects. When it comes to the potential for Africa, you can see from this that there are really just some concentrated trading partners, but there's a significantly large portion of the globe with yet you don't have solid trading relationships from an air cargo perspective. Again, that bodes very well for future growth. This is one of the big challenges, and I was very interested in the SATAM discussions because one of the key challenges, as we said, from air cargo is how you use and deploy the assets in an efficient manner. And this is just a chart, I'm not going to go through it all, but it shows how the trade imbalance varies by region of the continent. In some, you've got much stronger outbound cargo, for example, the perishables. In others, you've got much stronger inbound cargo in terms of the fact that it's a consumer market rather than an export market. So the challenge is that you need an environment, a flexibility where carriers can deploy the assets where the business is actually needed. Lastly, we're going to talk about e-commerce, and this is just to show that this is one of the areas where e-commerce is expanding quite rapidly. When you've got a young, technically connected workforce and labor market, and if it's anything like my daughter, the young people of Africa will be buying something online about every 5 minutes. Apparently they have to do that, that's what my daughter tells me. If she doesn't buy something after 5 minutes, then her friends will no longer talk to her. I didn't understand that that was a real thing, but apparently it is. But what are people buying? Well, they're buying clothes, they're buying toys, electronic gadgets, etc. And they're all expected to be growing significantly over the next 5 years. So that was just a very quick run through. Last thing I wanted to say, and this is something that's also quite unique in this marketplace, is the fact that you've got a lot of concentration of what we would call domestic heroes. These are freight forwarders who are African businesses who have grown up in this marketplace. They feel very proud of this marketplace, and it's a very strong aspect of the future growth here. So you've actually got a much larger concentration of business in the hands of, as it were, domestic forwarders. Now with that, we will go on to the, it's lunch break, so enjoy your lunch. So I will join the panel, as I say. That was too long for me to stand, Aaron. I have to sit down now. Great. Apparently you have to switch them on. I wasn't very good at technology at school, and that continues now. So first of all, I'd like to actually put a question to Enquanhone, starting this way. If I could first ask you just to introduce yourself and your role very, very briefly, and then if you could go in to answer the question which I have here, which is about e-commerce, and in particular, the agreement that you've got with Mail Americas, where you're looking at dedicated mail and courier products. And that's quite an interesting product development to support e-commerce. So if you could explain a little bit more about that strategy after you've explained a little bit about what your role is.
Okay, thank you, Glyn. My name is Enquanhone Minyashal. I am Director Cargo Marketing for Ethiopian Airlines. I've been with Ethiopian Airlines for the last 23 years, of which around 17 years is cargo and the remaining with passenger. And to go to your question, e-commerce, thanks to COVID, we don't say thanks to COVID, but thanks to COVID, showed us a road that we can grow. So at the moment, Ethiopian Airlines is building an e-commerce center, which can hold around 150,000 tons per year, and it's a $50 million project. The reason we went on building this e-commerce facility is we have a strategy, which is Vision 2035. In that vision, we want to make Ethiopian Cargo a smart hub. And in that smart hub, e-commerce, pharmaceuticals, transshipments, and the current transit cargo is our target that we can grow with. So e-commerce being one pillar of the smart hub, we're focusing in developing not the entire e-commerce process, but we need to serve the middle mile, which is transporting the e-commerce parcels between airports, and especially focusing into Africa, because we're not accessing the e-commerce movement into Africa and within Africa also. So our target is mainly within Africa, but currently, since we're doing an e-commerce movement between China and LATAM, China and Europe, we want to bring that to Africa and focus in Africa and do this e-commerce business within Africa. So we're not going to do it. We need to have third parties to do the third mile, the final mile, all those things. They need to do it. So Air America and other e-commerce companies will be part of that project so that we can achieve what we're looking for. At the same time, we are also working to engage with all e-commerce companies within Africa, like Jumia and all, so that we can connect all these dots together and move forward.
Excellent, thank you, Enquanhone. And e-commerce is expected to grow in double digits, solid double digits, so it's a great direction. And I should say thank you for stepping in today for Mr. Abel Elime, who had to go elsewhere. So Mike, I'd like to come to you now, and again, maybe ask you just to introduce yourself a little bit and explain Astral Aviation, although I'm sure everybody in the audience knows about Astral. And then I would also like to say, first of all, thank you to what Astral did during COVID as well, where you deployed as many aircraft, and I think they were almost doing hops at some point. You were literally dropping off vaccine as you could pick it up from a donor state, working very closely with the COVAX facility. And I know, and also Ethiopian did a tremendous job during that, so the whole world thanks you. So Mike, maybe if you could actually also address the question about your fleet, because you grew during COVID, and what's your expectations going forward?
Thank you, Glyn. Name is Michael Mutahi. I'm the CEO and accountable manager for Astral Aviation. I think COVID for Astral was a blessing in disguise. In terms of we were able to deliver COVID vaccines and PPEs to over 45 countries in Africa during the 2020-2022 period. Now, the continent had some challenges in that we did not have any capacity. And we have some partners to thank, which is the AU, COVAX, and HOPE Consortium, who trusted us to assist in this operation. In terms of our fleet, yes, it has grown thanks to COVID, brought in some much needed funds that enabled us to acquire or modernize our fleet to some extent. From a narrow body, the 7.2, we moved to the 757 and the 767. Our planned expansion includes bringing in 767-300s and 777s. I'm sure you've had a chance to see the magazine that was shared. My CEO, Sanjeev Gadia, has explained in great detail of what our expansion plan is. In terms of Astral and the evolving cargo market, traditionally we've had a lot of belly cargo, and the freighters have not had a competitive chance. But I think now with moving forward, I think there are customers there who don't utilize the belly capacity, partly because of the type of products they have. Two, things like outsized cargo that will not fit in bellies, and I think freighters have an opportunity there. And as much as it may be perceived like it's a competition, it's not really a competition. We coexist, and I think together we would be able to provide a specialized and customer-oriented service that will benefit and effectively help in the global logistic ecosystem.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Mike. And now, Randy, when Mike mentioned 777s, you just had a little smile that came onto your mouth there. Now, one of the things I mentioned this morning was the historical situation that we would traditionally say that cargo moved 50% in the bellies, 50% on main deck in the freighters. Going forward, we feel that, or from what we see and assessing with our members, that the role of the freighter is going to be even greater going forward. How do you see it from the point of, from Boeing's perspective?
You hit on a key point when you mentioned 777. It's worth taking a look backward before I answer about the future. If we look back 2 decades, that was when the 777-300ER was introduced. And when that airplane was first introduced, those who were in the industry at the time and understood the passenger freight combination business, they were very familiar with an airplane that was called the 747 Combi. The 777-300ER suddenly became known as the Combi of the wide-body fleet because of the great capabilities in that twin-engine, highly efficient airplane and all of the volume and weight that could be carried in the lower hold. And that started a revolution in approach to manufacturers and their design of wide-body airplanes. So airplanes like the 777 and the 787 continued to be the most operated passenger airplanes during the pandemic because of their capability to transport cargo in the lower hold and do it very efficiently. So yeah, the dynamic has changed a bit, but there's still a great place in the transport of goods on dedicated freighters. There are needs to transport between specific locations that aren't necessarily passenger terminals. There's a need to transport hazardous goods. There's a need to transport other items that aren't necessarily compatible with transporting on passenger airplanes, like Formula One race cars and racehorses. So there's going to continue to need to be a place in the future. I took a look at some statistics on this, anticipating that you might go to this direction. The numbers are slightly different between the global average and here in Africa, where Africa is recognizing the value of that wide body lower hold even more so than the rest of the industry. Globally, before the pandemic, it was nearly 50-50, as Glyn highlighted. About 54% of the traffic was moved in wide body lower holds before the pandemic, and 46 in dedicated freighters. That switched to approximately 30 on passenger, 70 on freighters during the pandemic. And today, as of March, which is the latest numbers out of IATA, it's at 54 on wide body and 56 on the dedicated freighters. So it's getting closer to that pre-pandemic kind of level. Again, somewhat held back by the return globally of the wide-body traffic, in particular in Asia, where, as you know, things have been slower to return. Here in Africa, where things have opened up much more significantly, the wide-body percentage of traffic went from pre-pandemic 67%. During the pandemic, 56%, so not the same drop, and already today is back to 68% of traffic carried on wide bodies, lower holds here in Africa. Now there's plenty of opportunity to grow some of that dedicated freighter business as the industry in total has recognized that contribution that Glyn highlighted to the revenue line for airlines globally. And so the right combination of efficient airplanes and recognizing opportunity in the market, I think there's more opportunity for some dedicated freighters in Africa.
Great, thank you, Randy. Now, that's from a wide-body perspective, but moving across to Dr. Jakob. First of all, you could just introduce yourself a little bit and explain particularly about the E-Jet conversion plan, because that's a narrow-body freighter, which is actually quite a modern aircraft. In fact, it's one of the newer types of aircraft, if I'm not mistaken. And what your program hopes to achieve, and in this particular region, how you see that market developing.
Yeah, thank you. Jakob Funkenstein with Embraer. And Yeah, thanks for that introduction to the aircraft. It is, in fact, a very modern aircraft. It is the most modern platform for a freighter out there. It entered into service in 2005. I'm talking about the E190 and 195 freighter passenger to freight modification program that we are offering. And we have currently about 700 of these aircraft that are based on our first generation E1 platform that are flying. So they will provide a good feedstock in the future for conversions. And we have, these aircraft are about in the 100 to 120 seat range. So they are very suitable for this category that we call the crossover market, the crossover between a large turboprop freighter and a narrow-body freighter, 737 or A320. And we really have some unbeatable economics because we're able to offer really oftentimes the same unit cost as the lower end, a 737-300 or 700, for a trip cost that is maybe 20 to 40% lower. So it becomes really paramount to think about whether you need the additional cargo capacity. We're talking about an additional cargo capacity of 2 to 3 tons that you may need it. On the other hand, if you aren't consistently flying at 16 to 18 tons, our E-jets are more in the 13 to 14 ton region. So if you're not using that additional tonnage, then you really ought to look at whether it doesn't make sense to have that cost savings. And that we're able to offer these unbeatable economics, as you say, because our platform is a very modern one based on a design that entered into service in 2005. We have 7 to 8 ULD positions on the main deck in the E190, 7 positions in the E190, 8 positions in the 195, and in addition to that, there's an underfloor, the underfloor lower deck for bulk cargo. Again, it's all about the economics and being able to offer that lower trip cost compared to the higher end and better unit cost compared to the large turboprop market.
Great, thank you, Jakob. I mean, again, then we've heard some great quality modern capacity that's there. So, Enquanhone, turning to you now, you mentioned in your first answer the pharma business. And I should congratulate you for being the first African carrier to obtain the IATA CEIV certification. And for those of you in the audience that aren't necessarily familiar with what that certification means, it's really about obtaining a quality level when you're moving precious pharmaceuticals throughout the entire supply chain, that you do it in full compliance with regulations. Bearing in mind that some of these drugs have to be kept in sometimes up to minus 20 degrees frozen state, other times it's a small window of +2 to +8, and if it goes beyond that, then the drug is effectively spoiled and has to be thrown away. And this is not the same as it were, a t-shirt that in summer you don't want a winter outfit, etc. When you're talking about pharmaceuticals, there's a patient at the end that's relying on those drugs quite often to save their life. So I think we should congratulate the carriers, also the equipment manufacturers, for producing and looking at this topic so seriously. So Enquanhone, my question to you is, you've also invested a significant amount of money in facilities in your home hub. It's difficult here because, of course, some of the temperatures that you get in summertime, etc. But do you see this as a aspect of the business that's growing, particularly with your network connecting the world? How do you see the pharma side growing?
Simply put, from our product portfolio currently, the champion is pharma at the moment. Reason being, with COVID, majorly with COVID, since the CEIV certification is very rigorous, we were tested, you can say, with IATA continuously to get this certification. And thanks to our facility, which is a state of the art, we now are certified, and we have under our portfolio a lot of forwarders working pharma. So I can say that the investment is returning at the moment in big ways.
Excellent. And I love the smile there when he said in big ways. That's a commercial man, isn't it? That's excellent. So Mike, now turning to you, we've heard already today a lot of speakers talk about the need for collaborations, partnerships, working closely together. And your CEO, who's a very inspirational man, and I have a weekly call with him, in an event in Johannesburg in February, he basically said with this new fleet, he'd love to be the partners of all African carriers that don't have freighters but want access to main deck capacity. So how important is it for you as an airline, for Astral Aviation, to forge partnerships, whether or not with startup airlines and whether or not you're supporting one in India, for example, or others? I think you announced something as well in South Africa. So how important is that for you as a strategy going forward?
I think all along, Astral's strategy has been to cooperate. As we speak, we have over 45 interlines with both foreign and African airlines. Moving forward, we support companies that are willing to work with us. For example, we probably work with all our competitors like Ethiopian Airlines, Kenya Airways, LAM, Air Tanzania, just to mention but a few. And the cooperation is broad. For example, with Ethiopian Airlines, we've got maintenance support. We maintain our aircrafts with them. Crew is trained at their facility, so we cooperate with them on different levels. Companies like Kenya Airways provide us with line maintenance. So we do cooperate with various airlines. We also like to support what we consider younger brothers, smaller operators. Like if you've heard recently, we're supporting a setup in South Africa, whereby we are willing to provide them with part of our aircrafts for them to start up until they're able to get their own. And we have companies that we're supporting in Lome, Prathan in India. So for us, joint cooperation is very important, and we are open to work with any African airline that is willing to develop, and mostly being an all-freight company as opposed to the other companies that tend to be both passenger and cargo. For Astral, we are dedicated to only cargo, and that puts us in a very unique position. When COVID came, we benefited the most, but now that the passenger service has come back on, you will notice cargo on purely freighter has gone down, as you mentioned. But we're looking at other ways. We're looking at specialized requirements by customers, as you mentioned, dangerous goods, things that cannot really be moved by other operators. So Astral, as a company, is dedicated to doing freight. And sometimes you come to conferences and people are focused so much on passengers. And we tend to feel like there's not enough attention or importance given to cargo. And I think COVID was an eye-opener for a lot of operators. And most of them are now starting to consider their cargo side of business. If I look at our brothers Kenya Airways, they've actually started being very aggressive in cargo. We welcome cooperations with big brothers like Kenya Airways, Ethiopian, and whatever the CEO mentioned in terms of growth and assisting each other to develop the continent, because I think it is still We also believe it's underdeveloped. The cake is very big. It just needs some people to take up the responsibility. Financing is an issue, but I think if we cooperate together, we should be able to jointly find solutions that will work for all operators.
Excellent, that was very well said. And just to let you know, in the cargo world, we call passengers self-loading freight. That's all they are. They're just boxes that strap themselves in. Randy, I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, because of course you mentioned the 777-200ER, which has about 25 tons, if I'm not mistaken, in the belly, regardless of passenger loads, winds, whatever. It's a real solid belly aircraft, and it really put cargo in the belly on the map. And in fact, some airlines like Cathay actually were serving 4 or 5 777 passenger aircraft, Hong Kong, London. They stopped the freighter. But now we're in a new era coming up with the 777-8F, which is a freighter, a twin, which is going to have the same payload as the old 747-400, which is going to bring, again, the cost of the cargo movement significantly lower. And when you look at Africa, and I mentioned earlier the trade in flowers generating $500 million worth of revenue here in Ethiopia, employing over 200,000 people, over 500,000 in Kenya, generating even more revenue. It's relatively low yielding for the airline, but it's high yielding for the country. So do you see that the 8F is actually going to facilitate much more growth in these type of sectors because the economics is going to be lower for the operators, and therefore it can open the door for much more cargo to move?
Indeed. And again, I'm going to take just a moment and go back in history. For the past century, it has been in Boeing genetics to be innovative and to be about moving cargo. I go back to our very first airplane, the Boeing Model 1, that was used to deliver mail. And then we had the first purpose-built cargo airplane in 1928, the first commercial jet cargo airplane in 1963. We built the first wide-body freighter in 2005. Not too long after that, we introduced the first Boeing converted freighter of the original 777-200 passenger airplane into a cargo airplane. And then, of course, the 300ER, which was the foundation for the 777 freighter, which is a fantastic freighter operated by the hometown airline here, and a great economic machine. What we're doing with the 777-8F is making the largest capacity in volume and payload airplane in a twin engine structure, as you mentioned. We're going to make that airplane the most connected airplane so that those shippers who are very concerned about the status of their pharmaceuticals or perhaps the status of their horses or whatever it is that they need to know about, available to them through an onboard network. And it's going to do all of that at economics that are actually lower cost than the 777 freighter, which is a resounding success for airlines today. And it's going to result in a 5% lower fuel consumption per trip, or per tonne of cargo carried. So the economics and viability of that airplane are going to open new opportunities. There's lots of concern about our environment, as rightfully there should be. We live in a world that we need to make sure we're protecting. This new 777 freighter will be the most efficient, not only in emissions of things that come out of the tailpipe, but noise. I have the luxury of hearing the airplane, the passenger version of that airplane, doing its test flying in the Seattle area. It is an amazing, massive bird with wingspan that is enormous. And when it passes over, you don't hear a sound. And that's going to open new opportunities because so much of the freight market operates overnight, but is restricted at those airports that are under curfew. This quiet 777-8F is going to open new opportunities there as well. So lots of potential. The economics are going to make it viable for lower value shipments to be transported profitably. So great prospects for the future with that airplane.
Great, thank you, Randy. And another fun fact, I should be doing fun facts today. More animals are carried in aircraft every year than human beings. There you go. When you take into account invertebrates and all sorts of other things. Now turning to you, Jakob. The previous speaker and others today have mentioned the word sustainability. And when I went through your website, I saw that you're doing some development with regards to next-gen sustainable aircraft. In fact, you have a program dedicated to that. It's not specific to cargo, but it's aviation. It's how you see the next step going forward. Perhaps you'd like to share with us what you're working on there.
Yeah,
hiding any secrets, of course, because there are competitors on the panel.
No, we understand that. Yeah, it is in fact really exciting times, and you can see this on our website as well. We are working right now on a new generation of 20 to 30 seat aircraft. We call it the Energia family of turboprop aircraft that will. One version is a hybrid electric. Which we are in the design phase right now. That is planned to enter into service around 2030. And another one, which is a hydrogen fuel cell, that the other type of propulsion that everyone is talking about. And that is actually slated to enter into service in 2035. And so we're doing quite a bit on the new aircraft development side. Of course, that is passenger, certainly applicable at some point to the cargo market. I mentioned earlier that that there are quite a number of turboprop freighters out there, and there's no reason why these platforms, these sustainable platforms, net zero carbon emissions platforms, can't be scaled up to make effective freighter aircraft at some point. But they are starting as passenger versions right now. Of course, moving to cargo, when we talk about sustainability, I'm going to come back to my earlier point. It is about having a fuel-efficient design, a modern design, which we do. So if you are able to minimize your fuel burn per whatever the metric in cargo per payload mile, then you are doing that. That is one of the main pillars, as we all know, for sustainability is efficiency, is having the most fuel-efficient aircraft that you possibly can. And so this is where we are, where we're doing a lot. Also our production processes as well, our conversion processes are very sustainable. The fact that that one does a passenger to freight conversion already in itself is a very sustainable thing, because you are prolonging the life of an aircraft that otherwise might serve 20 years. Now you're getting another 10 to 15 years out of it, which is a good thing, again, as long as the fuel burn efficiency makes sense from an environmental point of view.
Excellent, yeah, and conversions, as you say, it's the purest form of recycling. Whether or not it's a BCF in regards to Boeing or what you're doing in terms of your E-Jet, it's actually adding years to that usable life. Enquanhone, turning to you now, talking of freighters, you've got 12 dedicated freighters, which is the largest freighter fleet in Africa. During COVID, and you operated up to, I believe, 26 freighters. Again, for those in the audience that have not heard the phrase freighter before, I don't know who invented it, but it's a combination of a passenger aircraft being used for cargo-only configuration. Many of the seats were stripped out, but boxes and cargo was loaded in the toilets, in the overhead compartments. Anywhere there was a space, there was boxes put in and strapped down. Sometimes it was put on seats, sometimes the seats were removed and it was strapped in place, and it was really an effective way of moving cargo around. I know Kenya Airways did it with 2 almost brand new 787s. The cargo said, "Thank you, we finally got a window, a big window to look out of." And it's something which you've gradually now replace the freighters back into the passenger fleet as the passenger business has returned. But you've also got ambitious plans to grow the freighter fleet. So what are your thoughts about that going forward?
Okay, the freighters saved the airline, first of all. In the COVID time, the freighters saved the airline. Not only saved the airline, we make the most profit. And to our passenger colleagues, we taught them that cargo can make revenue and profit also. The profit that ET generated the last 2 years was the highest, and some 50% of the revenue was coming from cargo, because the freighters that were converted, the 19 freighters, at one time it was 23, but the 19 stayed for so long. So the last freighter is going to be converted this week to passenger, and we will not have it anymore, because originally it was made for passenger. But we used it, you said you don't know who created it, but COVID came around January, and we started converting our aircrafts on March. So in a way, we reacted as early as possible to the market, because the market was extremely dynamic, and we needed to transport PPEs and vaccines. All those things were easy to transport. But now, those things doesn't exist, and the aircrafts will not be profitable because yields keep on going down. So we need to return back to the freighter, the traditional way of doing business, and the belly. Because still all these aircrafts are wide bodies, and we use the belly, 130 of them around. We use the belly, the bulk, everything we use to transport cargo. The other point is, at the moment we have 9 777s, 4 737s, and 1 767. It's not 12. And the additional 1 767 that we're converting in our MRO is going to be out this week. So it is going to be a second 767. And this year, around November, we will get our 777 again. So it will be 10. And next year on March, second 777 will join us. So whatever market we created using the P2F, the freighters, we're trying to serve it with these additional capacities. We're not letting go any market at the moment. We're serving as much as we can, whatever demand created back then in COVID era and the pandemic. We're somehow continuing it. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you for that. Mike, we heard in the last session costs, fees, charges, etc. mentioned. It's something that your CEO has often mentioned about, is the fact that cargo in traditional times, and as Enquanhone was saying now, as yields come lower, the margins become thinner. The focus becomes much more then on the cost of operations, of the border costs, the complexities of that, taxes, tax on fuel, for example. What's your guidance, or what would be your comments to governments with regards to the fact that if they put the taxes and the fees, if they're too high, people can't operate freighters. If they can't operate freighters, they can't move, they can't exchange, they can't trade. If they can't trade, they can't generate national income. So there's a huge knock-on effect of a high-cost operating environment. Is this something that you've seen improvements of, or do you have hopes that going forward that governments will listen and improve that area?
I think in an earlier group there was mention of governments looking at aviation as a luxury thing. So if I take my country for example, there's a tax they call the Railway Development Levy, which to us does not really make sense, where one mode of transport is supporting another. And during the COVID time, we did not see that reciprocated, because apart from the freighter side, I mean, passenger flights were all grounded, and a lot of losses were incurred. So in general, there's not much support that airlines have really come to expect from their government. It's a sad thing. And then when you look at infrastructure that is required, we're not really getting it the way we need it, not even want it, the way we need it. So even in the connectivity, as much as we want to connect the entire continent, there are places you cannot go. They don't simply have the facilities. And it is unfortunate that these governments are not looking at aviation as an economic driving force. So for us as an airline, because the margins have become smaller and smaller, we are starting to come up with innovative ways of surviving, literally. One is introducing different kinds of services like sea air, whereby you're combining cargo being moved by sea then by air. We know sea is very economical, it's cheap, and that allows for a lower cost, and this is passed on to the customer, and they're able to now accept it. And this also helps them move things much faster as opposed to relying on sea. Two, there are a lot of countries that in Africa that are landlocked, so they may not be able to enjoy that service of sea unless there is an air connectivity bit to it. So in Astral, we are looking at this as a new revenue source where we partner with sea freight to see if we can do that. The other area we are looking at is a road feeder service to access those areas where these facilities are not there, where the infrastructure is not there. So you can bring cargo to the closest facility that is available and then look at providing a road feeder service. And this, unfortunately, is the way to go for a lot of African countries. They simply do not have the infrastructure, and if they do, it's very, very expensive.
Okay, thank you for that, Mike. Randy and Jacob, I'm going to ask a similar question now, and it's similar to an extension of what Mike's just talked about there. We heard in the session before, and I'm sorry, Aaron, I didn't hear, is it 54 or 55 countries? Because I heard both numbers, and it can't be 54.5. It's okay, so of the 55 countries that you've got here, 15% of the global population, the number of different border crossings is incalculable. And it's often said the easiest way to go across a border is in an aeroplane, because you just fly over it. But as Mike said, the infrastructure is not there. You've got a lot of landlocked countries. Today, if cargo is coming in on a seaport and then has to be trucked inland, it's going through many border crossings. That's adding time, complexity, and obviously cost. So with only 2% of global air cargo volumes today, Randy, how do you see, and what's your thoughts about this market? You're obviously very familiar with Africa. You spoke about it very passionately and eloquently. You've obviously spent a lot of time here. So going forward, whether or not it's 5 years, 3 years, 10 years, 2063 with Saturn fully employed, but let's hope before then, what's your level of optimism about growth, intra-African trade?
I am even more optimistic after listening to what I heard earlier today, because a lot of the same principles that impact and provide opportunity to passenger transportation apply to the movement of freight by air. And also, there's been a lot of talk about the underdeveloped part of Africa. There's a lot of development. In fact, the urbanization that has happened on the continent, which drives commerce and trade, is enormous. In the past 30 years, 82 million people have moved into cities of greater than 1 million in population. There's been a huge urbanization, and that drives trade, because those people are no longer growing their own crops or knitting together or sewing their own clothing. And of course, we talked about how technology is influencing things, and lots of imports and opportunities for those urbanized places to export and export new things, not only natural resources. So all of that goes into a foundation of some data that we collect when we do our 20-year outlook. And right now, we are looking over the next 20 years for Africa to see trade grow at 6.4% per year. And that trade is going to lead to a need for a lot of air transport. East Africa in particular is going to accelerate that trade, leading the average annual trade growth of 9.4%. Huge correlation in trade between those major lanes that Glyn highlighted earlier, so great potential there. In addition to all of that, not only is there going to be a great growth of population and urbanization, but there's going to be increasing wealth. So in the next decade, by 2035, it's projected that the number of middle-class household incomes will increase by 35%. And in places like East Africa, the average GDP growth per capita should approach 3%. So it's not only population growth, but growth of individual wealth and spending power. All of that can drive to higher education, more skills, more development of industry, and of course then more purchasing. So all good for trade and commerce. I couldn't be more excited about the prospects for the future, and the fact that all this progress is being made around opening the skies, focus on reducing taxes and fees, is going to enable this entire industry to get to that new narrative that we're here talking about today.
Excellent, thank you, Randy. And Jakob, do you have similar optimism, considering your aircraft also need shorter runway length and second-tier airports, so it can actually help fuel that growth?
Yeah, certainly I share Randy's optimism about the region as a whole and the economic growth that is going to be above average over the next several decades, and of course the infrastructure investment both on the air side and elsewhere as well. So I think all of the factors are in place for a really booming air cargo industry. I think it's also worthwhile pointing out, we heard at the one of the previous sessions regarding the single market and some of the difficulties in getting there. It's worthwhile to note that cargo is usually it's usually a little bit easier. All the permitting, cargo is usually kind of a forerunner for being able to establish that single market, and it's usually cargo that's able to drive a lot of that air traffic growth in the beginning. So we're, certainly at Embraer, we're very optimistic about the region, both in Africa, Middle East as well. The other thing that I would point out from a regional aircraft point of view is that we see a lot of long, thin markets here, developing here and already operating here. And of course, it's no surprise that we believe we have just the right size in this crossover jet market category to serve that part of the market, where perhaps a standard narrow-body freighter is just a little bit too much payload, and the range capability of a turboprop freighter is just not there, and so the crossover jet is just the right aircraft for, particularly for this region in our view.
Great, thank you, Jakob. So I think that's a great place to call an end to this panel. We've heard some great optimistic numbers, boom in trade, expert views. So could I ask for a round of applause, and also a round of applause for everybody involved in cargo in the room that moved the vaccine, the PPE. We've got Kenya Airways, we've got other carriers in here as well. I think it was a collective, show that what this industry can do when the going gets tough. So a round of applause for not just the panelists, and they certainly deserve one, but for everybody that's been involved in cargo over the last few years. Thank you all.
Wow. Thank you very much, and well done to the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause, please. And just wait for some tokens of appreciation from the organizers of this event. Ladies and gentlemen, we are far behind schedule. We still have 2 brief 15 minutes each presentation, so we have 30 minutes for 2 presentations, and that will do it for the day. However, for those who are members of the the AIG, Air Transport Steering Committee, you've got to wait a little bit longer after that, because there's a meeting once we close. So I crave your indulgence, still wait. Thank you very much, Jason.